Hello and welcome to this ninth and final lesson in this series on Unity Fundamentals created for the students at Saturday Academy. I am the instructor Will Patillo, and in this lesson we are going to be covering some win-loss conditions for our little prototype game. So we'll just create a treasure object, create 3D object and a cube, make something nice and simple, and I'm going to call this treasure. And in here we'll go ahead and open up the list of materials and make it a nice gold color. And for now, just to make it easy to debug, I'm going to take this and just place this right here in the prison where it's very easy to get. We'll make it a trigger. And this object, once the player touches that, then they win, is the goal. So next we're going to create a empty game object that's going to be our level controller. So game object, create empty, F2, call this a level controller. And we're going to attach a, let's actually make this, set this at 0, not really important, but now I'm going to create a new script, C#. I'm going to call this game over. Open this up, get rid of these methods right here, and this is going to have two public methods, public void win, just leave it empty for now, and a public void lose. And for now we'll just use a debug log message. You win, and then the same down here for losing. You lose. Okay. And we'll start with our win condition. Just create something really quick. Go on to this treasure. We'll just add in a contact event right there. And on contact, bring in our level controller, and then, right, because the level controller actually needs the game over script attached to it. So level controller, game over, and win. All right, now let's see if that works. Go in, console, go ahead and touch the treasure, and you win. Okay. So now let's see what happens when you win. So we'll go in here, and in this line right here, we'll add this line, scene manager dot load scene, and in here, if we take a look at the documentation for load scene, you need to give it either an int of the scene's index or a string with the scene's name. So if we go in our levels right here, so assets, scenes, right now this is sample scene, and you can see what scene you're in right up here. And I'm just going to rename this to level 1. So now that's the name of the scene, which I can use, or I can use its index. Now to find that, and actually this is something we need to do anyways, go into File, Build Settings, and the scenes in build, right now we have nothing listed. So we need to add the scene that we're in so that it's registered. So I'll click Add Open Scenes, and now we have scenes level 1, and it's at index 0. Okay. Now, in this game over, now that I have that information, go with a serialize field, and I'm going to go with the string values. Serialize field string win level. And I'll also create one for lose level. Now in SceneManager.loadScene, I simply say win level. Same thing for the losing. SceneManager.loadScene, lose level. Using variables rather than just say putting it directly putting in level 1. Now, this would work for here, but the nice thing about using variables is now we can set these in the inspector right here once they show up. Oh, they're not showing up because there are console errors, and the reason for that is we are missing a library. So what we need is using Unity Engine .scene management. Well, that should make that go away. There, they're gone. And in terms of how I would know that, if you look at this documentation for the SceneManager.loadScene, if you look in their example code, they'll show you all the libraries that you need for this particular method to work. So that's always a good thing to check. Alright, so now in the inspector these show up, and I'll just say if you win you'll go to level 1, and if you lose you also go to level 1. If we had more levels, then win level I would say level 2, lose, repeat the one that you're at. For now we're just going to repeat the same level no matter what. And as I was saying, the advantage of putting these in variables is we can use the same script in each level and then just put in different variables for each of them, and they'll all be able to go to whatever level you need. If you're worried about typing these in wrong and getting errors from that, then it might be a little less error prone to instead here just to use zeros as the int, and then instead of making these strings you could make them ints like that. But strings should work for now. And okay. Oh, and also speaking of libraries, I'm not going to need either of those. Alright, so now let's see what happens when I touch that yellow cube. I walk over to it, and I get that console log saying I win, and I also teleport back to the beginning of the level. What's happening right here is when you load a scene, all of these game objects in the scene reset to the values that you have in the inspector. So as I'm playing the game, the transforms are changing, maybe these coins get removed from the list, positions move, and so on. And once a scene loads, it always resets. Okay, so there is our win condition. Now that we know that this works, I can just take my treasure and throw it over somewhere a little more interesting. Let's put it over here for now. And now let's move on to our lose condition. So we'll start by just having if the guard gets too close to the player, then you lose. So we'll go into our guard AI. In addition to looking for the prisoner, they're also going to check their range from the prisoner and potentially attack, depending on how close they are. So let's put in an if statement here. So if vector3 dot distance, and in parentheses here, transform dot position, so that's referring to the transform of the game object that the script is attached to, which is the guard, and then getting its position. And then prisoner dot position. So now with these two arguments, we have the distance between the guard and the prisoner. And now we'll say if it's less than or equal to the guard's attack range, which is something we haven't defined yet. So let's go here and just add to our list of floats here. I'll just add in attack range. Okay, less than or equal to attack range, and then call a method to attack. So let's create that attack method. I'll just put it right down here at the bottom, and I'll go with a void attack. Open up those braces and put in debug.log to make sure that this works. I'll just say attacking. And next, we want to tell the... Now this wouldn't make sense to have the guard end the game directly. Really, they should tell the player that they've been attacked, and then the player decides whether it dies or not, what it does with the fact that it's been attacked. So for now, I'm just going to put in a comment, TBD, get player info, tell them they have been attacked. So let's create that player information, because right now there's nothing on the player to receive the notification that it has been attacked. So I'll go on to our scripts here and now create a new C# script, and I'm going to call this player stats. Actually, you know what? I'm going to rename this. And I'm going to name the script character stats. Keep it nice and general in case you want to apply it to characters that aren't the player. Okay. So now here in my character stats, I'm going to put in a public void take damage. And we'll be adding some, passing some arguments later to deal with amounts. For now, we'll just put in a no conditions, just say on die dot invoke. Okay, which means we need a unity event. Serialize field unity event on die. So that this means something. Which means we need that library, unity engine.events. We can get rid of these two. Okay. Now let's make sure to attach this character stats to the player. And on die, now we can tell this level controller to lose. Alright. So now, and also one other thing I'm going to add in this conditions right here. Right now I'm only checking the distance, but this might still attack if the guard's just kind of patrolling around and say the character sneaks up behind them. Well, they're still within the attack distance, and so the player would lose in that case, but we don't really want that. So this attack should only happen if the player is being chased, or specifically is being chased by this guard. So I'm going to add in another condition here, state equals guard state dot chase and vector3.distance is this. Okay, so now let's see if we can get caught by the guard. Oh, and also, just to make this a little quicker, I'm going to just start the player outside of the room. And actually, since I can debug this way, get out of the room easily just by moving the player, so I don't forget about it, I'm going to go into my button and make this locked again, so that the game functions as correctly as possible. Alright, so I'm around here. Let's see, take a look open up the console. The guard sees me, and nothing is happening. Well, that may be because I forgot to set a variable. Yes, this attack range is still 0. So I'm going to set this, let's say, 1.5. Okay, and then the guard sees me, and they are this attacking method's being called, but I'm not actually losing. So that's because this attack doesn't actually do anything other than, say, this debug log. So now that we actually have the ability for the character to take damage, which we'll then call the lose through the on-die event, let's go back to attack. And first, we need to get a reference to this character stats script. And fortunately, we already have a reference to the prisoner's transform. That is, we have a reference to this, and we need a reference to this. So we can get that by first saying, I'm just going to create a little variable here, character stats enemy equals prisoner dot game object dot get component character stats. Okay. So we're creating a temporary variable, and I lost my brace somehow. We're creating a temporary variable of type character stats called enemy, which makes use of the fact that this guard already has a reference to this player transform, looks at the transform, goes up, finds the game object, uses, and then gets component character stats on that game object. And another brace got lost. Alright. Okay, so now that we have the reference, we can then say enemy dot take damage. So that goes into this class and calls this method. So run the game. Guard sees me, chases, gets close, and then the game resets. If we want to make that happen, wait till the guard gets a little bit closer. We can always change this attack range. So let's say I set it to 1. Now, the guard gets close and has to get a little bit closer to the player before that scene reset happens. And I kind of like that distance of 1, so I'll leave it right there. Okay, so now we actually have our win and loss conditions, but I'm not really liking the fact that we lose immediately as soon as the guard touches you. I would rather, to give the player a little bit of slack, for the player to take damage over time and to only lose when they run out of health. Character stats, going to create some new variables, and I'll create a serialized field int max health, and then a not serialized int health. Take damage is going to need to receive an argument of type int, and I'll just call it damage. And now we can say health minus equals damage. I'll have on this guard AI add in a new serialized field int attack power. Now, in this right here, I can say attack power. Okay, that should make that error go away. Now, let's say for the player, we have this max health int right here. Let's give the player 25 hit points. And let's say that the guard has an attack power of 5. So that means the player can be hit 5 times before they lose. Run the scene. We'll watch the console right here. And attacking once and you already lose. So that is not actually working correctly. And the reason for that is health has not been set. This has just been initialized to 0. So we need another method right here, private void start. So this will happen as soon as the scene opens, and I'm using start because it's initializing. Health equals max health. So that way we make sure that, so we've set in the inspector that this is 25. Now we need to set this equal to that. Now when we remove damage, health won't already be at 0. Oh, and then obviously I just see another problem here, is that there's no condition around on die. So say if health is less than or equal to 0, then on die. Alright, now let's run this. Okay, watching the console, and guard comes at me, and bang. So pause the game. Notice attacking happens 5 times before the lose method is called. However, it's still happening instantaneously. And the reason for that is because the attacking happens here in this guard right here. This update's called every frame, and as long as the guard stays in the chase state and it continues to be close, this attack is just going to keep getting called. So we need a cooldown on this attack. And there's a bunch of different solutions. We can knock back the player, we could make the player temporarily invulnerable. But what I'm going to go with is just putting a cooldown on the attack, because that just feels the most realistic. Okay, I'll say attack cooldown time. Actually, this line's getting a little bit long, so I'm going to put those 3 together. And this is totally arbitrary how I'm dividing this up. Copy that serialized field. Alright, so now we have an attack cooldown time. I'm going to actually use a Boolean variable, kind of like a flag, and I'm going to call this attack in cooldown. Then when the game starts, attack in cooldown equals false. Oh, also, importantly, here on this if statement, I'm just going to add another condition, and not attack in cooldown. Then, when the attack happens, in addition to the player taking damage, I'll also set attack in cooldown equals true. So when the guard attacks, attack in cooldown becomes true. Now this condition will fail, and because it's an and, that means this whole thing will evaluate to false, and now attack won't happen even though this condition's being called every frame. What we still need, though, here is some way for attack in cooldown to be set back to false so the guard can attack again. So a way I'll just deal with that is I'll create a new method right here, void end attack cooldown, no arguments, and say attack in cooldown equals false. And now here in attack, after setting attack and cooldown to true, I'll just put in evoke, so this functions as a delay, and I will say end attack cooldown, that's the method name, and also use attack cooldown time. So after the player attacks and this flag is set to prevent them from attacking again in the subsequent frames, they also call this method after this much time, which unsets the flag so the guard can attack again. So let's set the variables here and see if this works. First I'll need to set an attack cooldown time. I'll set that to 1 second. So now we'll run this. Guard attacks me. Attacked once, twice, 3s, 4, 5, and then it resets. Great. Also, I was just noticing the guard is pushing the player around, which seems a little weird. I think would be better if the guard just stopped once they're close to the player. For that, I'm going to take a look at what is moving the guard. Let's see, we have, yes, it's in this follow script right here. So for here, right now, yeah, every update it's moving a little bit closer to the target. So I'm going to add a new float right here. Float minimum distance. So right now the guard's going to try to get exactly to its goal, and I want them to stop when they're just close. In my move, if vector3.distance and parentheses again, and it's the distance between self and the target, or the target's position anyway, self's position, target's position, then you move. And if, sorry, if this distance is going to evaluate to a distance is greater than minimum distance, then we move forward. And if not, then we skip that. So let's place right here. I'll set a minimum distance. I was kind of liking that distance of 1. This needs to be smaller than your attack range. Otherwise, the guard will stop out of its own range and will never attack. Alright, so let's run this and see, the guard sees me, and now it stops. And it's a little close, so I'm going to change that setting right here. Let's give it a minimum distance, let's say 1.25. See how that runs. Gets close, and it stops with just a little bit of space between itself and the player. Now, one potential problem you might have is if, say, this follow target, oh, this got really high up in the air. Let's say this had a small collider, or let's say the attack range was fairly large. This minimum distance could stop the guard from touching it. In fact, actually, let's just go ahead and I'll show you that. I'm going to change this sphere collider to a radius of 0.1. And let's move the player back inside. And let's see what happens. Guard. Yes. Right here, the guard is moving to this follow target, but they haven't quite reached it. And so they never trigger this contact event, and so they stop in their patrol path. Now, obviously, I could address that by just letting its radius be large enough that the guard reaches it, but I don't want to be locked into little details like that, or for errors to show up unexpectedly because of scene-specific details. How the guard, when it changes state, is setting its move speed to different speeds for when it's chasing versus when it is patrolling, I'm going to do the same thing for its minimum distance. So that way, when it's chasing after the player, it can have a nice wide minimum distance that gives us some nice personal bubble. And when it's patrolling, it has a very small minimum distance, so it makes sure that it gets to that patrol point. So that's an easy fix. I can just go into this follow and just add another public void set minimum distance, and we're using this to get around the limitations of Unity events. Float distance, and now we can say minimum distance equals distance. Now that we have this method in the guard, can just go right here and bring in itself for both of them. Select the follow component, set minimum distance. So for the player, I was finding, or for chasing, I was finding the 1.25 worked pretty well. And then for patrolling, I'll set this to 0.1. Make it nice and narrow. Oh, also I'm noticing a lot of these bold things, so let's go back to the guard container and apply some of those overrides. So that should work. If I take this follow target and I set its radius very small, as I had before, and let's lower these patrol paths a little further. 5. Run the game, and if we watch the guard, there's our target. Its minimum distance is still 1. Oh, right, because it's because onCalm is only called when it transitions to this state, whereas its actual starting values are all just here. So I can just set this to 0.1. Actually, you know what would be even better is for this guard AI, right here at start, I'll just say onCalm.invoke. That way we can be sure that the values initialize to these, even if they weren't set correctly. So I could, at this point, even say none for that, and 5 for this, and I should be able, it should work fine. Yeah, so now its target is being initialized automatically, and so is its minimum distance. So now it's able to patrol despite the follow target being very small. And then also, when I bring the player out, it won't get cramped, because the minimum distance will get set back to that high value. And it was only there for a moment, but you may have seen that it was already back to 1.25. Just a little few finishing touches here. Just one thing I'm going to bring back. This doesn't really affect design a whole lot, but I just kind of miss these. I'm going to bring back our teleport right here, and they're over like that, and just going to use this as a way of evading the guard. Just a little game mechanic right here, because now we can actually set this guard speed. Let's say when it's chasing, it goes at 5, so it's just as fast as the player. I need to set the player as the to move. Object of interest, set that to player. And then also, so that these don't call right away, I'm going to set the starting index on both of these to -1. And Actually, that is worth overriding. Okay. So now I start at the beginning of the room, escape here, the guard's chasing me, it's hard to get away from, I'm being attacked, but then I teleport away, and now the guard has a hard time seeing me. And it continued followed for a little while, because of that cooldown. And now that I've escaped from the guard, I can go over here and pick up the treasure. Okay, so one last thing I want to add before I finish up here is just adding a tiny little bit of user interface. What I would like to have is a little bit of text, maybe just up in the top left corner here, that displays the player's stats, and for now that's just health. So to add that in, just go in here, create UI. We'll start with a panel. And what you'll see as soon as you create a UI element, you get this gigantic window. And you can pretty much ignore the scale of this. It doesn't mean anything because the canvas is set to screen space, and right now I'm using overlay. That should work fine. There are other settings, screen space camera, which is similar but has slightly different context where you use it. World space is great if you're creating like an in-game sign that you can move around and like you have to be close to it to see it. This panel, and a canvas by itself is invisible, but allows other things to be visible on the screen. And a panel is what we'll actually use to display the text, or so we can make sure we have a dark background and it shows up clearly. So I'm going to set this color to be dark, and I'm going to increase the alpha on this. So let's try 150. Let's go with 200. Okay. Now I'm going to shrink this down. Just take this. So you can use this for scale. This is nice if you're just moving particular edges. The rect tool. You can grab here, shrink that down to as big as we want. Now remember, this whole white box represents the screen. So what it's actually going to look like is this. And I'm going to pull it a little away from that corner using this move tool. Just drag it a little away from those corners so we have a bit of a nice boundary there. And let's see preview what this looks like. Okay, that should be fine. Now underneath the panel, select that, right click UI text, and set our text color to white. Okay. Now use our rect tool right here and drag it so that make sure that it's inside the panel with a little bit of border around it. I'm going to center this on both directions. And here I'm going to say health, and then this is going to be overwritten anyway, so this is just making sure that the sizing is right. So I look at game, view, and yeah, health 25, that's big enough. Now, one thing you might notice is that this text is kind of blurry. Now, a lot of people might say, well, don't use Unity's UI, go with TextMesh Pro, and then it'll work much better. And yeah, there are uses for TextMesh Pro, but that's kind of overkill for this. There's actually a much easier way to make the text sharper, and all we have to do for that is to increase the font size. So let's increase it 4x, and actually rather than calculating that in my head, I'll just type in 14 times 4, and it does the math for you. And then we're going to decrease the scale. So right now it's not visible because the text is bigger than this rectangle, and you can see that if I like stretch this out, then now I can see it. But when it doesn't fit, it just disappears, which is kind of an odd design choice. You'd think it'd just like show up partially, but oh well. So to bring it back into view while keeping this very large font size, I decrease the scale, which annoyingly shrinks down the box, so I'll grow that back up again. expand it back, and now you can see this text is nice and crisp. This isn't going to update. It's just always going to say 25. So I'm going to add in another script that can be in charge of updating this. And I'm going to call this, create C# script stat display. And I'll attach it to, let's say, the panel. Okay. Now, in this stat display, this is going to need to have access to the contents of this text. So I'm going to create a serialized field and text, and I'll call it health text. Actually, also for the example purposes, I'm going to say it's 25 out of. So the current health out of the max health, and just to use a little divider right there. So now I'm getting a error right now in the console saying text could not be found, and that's because we are missing a library. Using Unity Engine.ui, we're not going to need collections or collections generic. Okay. So now we have, now in this panel, we can bring in this text component right here. So now this script now has access to this component here. To access the text field, or to change it, create a public void refresh. Just call it refresh. And I'm going to pass in int health. And actually, I'll go ahead and pass in max health as well. Because this object shouldn't have to go out and find what max health is on character stats. It should just be told what information it needs to refresh. So when this refresh method is called, I can say health text dot text. So health text is the component, text is the text field inside here, equals, and let's see, what are we going for? First, they're just going to have a fixed health colon space. So put in these little quotes marks here, health colon space. Now plus, and get our current health plus, and then space slash space slash space plus max health. Okay, so now when this method is called and you pass in these two arguments, it should display something like this, except these two will be based on the variables that are passed in. And this text here is just so we know that the sizing's right. It's going to be overwritten anyway. Now, we need to actually call this refresh method. And it seems like a good place to have that happen is in this take damage. So this is going to need to have a reference to that stat display. And let's just go the quickest way to do this. This isn't really the best. I'd rather use a Unity event here. Well, I'll start with this. Okay, get a reference to stat display called display, and then right here we can say display dot refresh, and then we just pass in health and max health. Alright, let's see if that works. I run the game. Panel showing up right where I want it to. I I move around, and then I touch the button, and now the guard sees me and is attacking. And oh no, there I'm missing a reference. I always forget these things. What's happening right here is this, player display. I have not actually set this reference. There we go. All right. And now I'm being attacked, and I'm seeing my health go down, and then go back to the beginning of the scene, and it resets. Now, right now, the refresh that brings it back to 2525 is dependent on the way the scene loading goes. That feels a little brittle. So I'll just say right here on start, I'll say display.refresh and health, max health. That is all for game mechanics. Now there's just one more housekeeping item I want to add before closing this off. To create a new folder right here, I'm going to call this Utilities. And inside of this folder, I'm going to place all of the extremely general purpose things that we've created over the course of this project, and just place them in here, so that way it'll be as streamlined as possible to just take these general purpose utilities and just place them in every project I work on, from now on. I'm going to go through my scripts folder and just look at the ones that are not really tied to the game. So character stats is a little bit unique. Collect all event, that's a good one. I'll drag that into utilities. Same with color changer, contact event, countdown event, and I'm holding control to select multiples. Fixed point movement, and follow. Let's see, and I'll move these over to utilities as well. And let's see, go through these. Game over, that one's unique to this game. Guard AI, this one's kind of in between. Well, move and rotate is definitely utility. Stat display, that one's unique. Keyboard input, I think that one, I'll bring it. Yeah, I mean, this one's going to need to change between each project, but it'll just be going in and messing with some values. Having it as a template is still nice. And I think I'll just take this guard AI as well. So yeah, nearly all of our code is very reusable, except for, and these three things kind of are as well, but I think they're so short and so tied to how the game works that it'd be better to just recreate them from scratch as they're needed. Okay, so these are all my script utilities. I'll just create a new folder, scripts, because in this utilities folder, I'm also going to bring in some of the general purpose prefabs. So if I look over in my regular prefabs folder, I think I will take my button container and the teleport system and the guard container, so that future projects can make use of these buttons, guards, and teleports. Let's see, the coin is kind of a maybe. I'll bring that in. And create folder, there's not really any risk here. Create this for prefabs, bring this over. And then next, I'll just take all of these materials as well. And the reason for it is if I take these prefabs into a new project, they're going to be referring to materials, and so they'll just show up as that weird pink color, and I have to recreate them. So to save myself that trouble, create another folder, materials, put all these utilities in there. Okay, and let's see, what else? Yeah, I guess since I'm using that coin animation, I'll drag this in as well. Otherwise, this coin prefab would break if I did not have this. Also animation, create a folder for coin so that as I create other animations, all their different components are kept together. Let's see. Scenes, that can stay here. Scripts already went through that. Okay, now these folders are empty. I'll just delete them. And yeah. So now everything that is not particularly unique to the project is in this utilities folder. Now I can take this, right-click, and click Export Package. And that takes all of these. I'm going to uncheck Include Dependencies. Sometimes that'll cause a bunch of things that are in the project that you don't want to come along with it. And now click Export. And I'll just find a place for it. So for me, I'll put this in Unity Projects, Teaching, and I'll call this Unity Fundamentals. And save. Right. So now I have this Unity package. And what that makes possible is if I were to close this out and to create a new Unity project, and for now I'm just going to call this test. Delete this, or test package. I create the project, and then once the project is open, I can go into Assets, Import Package, Custom Package, and I select this Unity Fundamentals package that I just created. Open that, click Import, and now I have this Utilities folder with all the various things that I had created. Now, one thing to watch out for is sometimes when you create things, depending on how you set them up, you might get some errors. So yeah, like right here, I did not package character stats into this. So if any of my scripts reference it, then that causes a problem. And so for now, I'm just going to comment out the offending lines like this. And then if, as I'm making this next game, I can continue adding to these utilities, maybe updating or extending some of these existing ones. And when I'm, far along on this project, I could always, and this utilities folders continue to update. I can re-export that, overwrite my Unity package, and over time, the personal library will just keep growing and growing. And so that's a very good practice as a developer, as a way of just not reinventing the wheel on every project that you make, and accumulating knowledge in an external way in addition to what you learn. Obviously, this game is very bare bones and kind of questionable as to the extent which it really even is a game, but if just taking all the mechanics that are involved, you can really easily see how without adding any additional code or any new functionality, you could create quite a bit just out of the things that were created here. You can create rooms, you can create locks on buttons with special conditions of collections you could create, so mazes with various targets you need to get. You could activate and deactivate doors, you could teleport around as another kind of maze feature. You could have guards patrolling the hallways in any kind of configuration you like. You could have lots of different guards, and they're able to chase you or go back. You can have a way of creating levels. So if you just create a bunch of different configurations, and then each one, oh right, I also forgot dragging the player to the object of interest. You could have a series of levels with each one leading to the next by just changing these text right here, especially things related to VR, that's a particular interest of mine. Then make sure to subscribe so that you see new videos as they come out. Also, if you like any of these videos, hit the like button as well. That really helps me out by making these videos more visible so that they show up higher in the YouTube's feed. But until next time, I'm Will Patillo, signing out.